Hey, Daily Dosers. My name's Austin Payne. I'm one of our high school pastors, and today we're looking at John chapter 20 and 21. And this is absolutely two of my favorite chapters in the book of John and one of my favorite gospels because John does a little bit of a pump fake at the end of his gospel. He writes, "These things are written down that you might believe in Jesus, the Messiah, and that through believing you might have life in his name." And it's almost like credits are rolling right there. And then he tells this bonus story about Peter. And I love this story. I love this moment because Jesus meets Peter. First and foremost, John 21:12 might be my life verse, right? Jesus looks at Peter and says, "Come and have breakfast." And you're like, thank God that a resurrected Jesus eats breakfast. That's good news. And then he goes into this story where 3 times he's going to ask Peter the same question. And this is maybe a familiar story for you. Maybe you grew up hearing it, but I think there's a really rich truth in here that when Jesus looks at us in the midst of our shame, in the midst of our brokenness, in the midst of our pain even. We're all familiar with the story of Peter, right? Peter denies Jesus right after very brashly, boldly saying, like, I'll go to death with you on Jesus' last night. And he goes, you're going to deny me before the rooster crows. And he does. 3 times he denies him. The last time, he really has no business denying Jesus. It's just him and a little girl. There's no one else around. He could even probably tell this little girl, like, yeah, I was a disciple. And yet he still denies Jesus and the rooster crows. And if you've ever been in a moment where you're experiencing deep shame, I can't imagine the shame and brokenness that Peter was feeling in this moment. And he just goes back to fishing. He goes back to what he knows. And Jesus meets him here. And the first time he asks him in verse 15, do you love me more than these? And Peter's response, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And in verse 16, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord. And he says the same thing, take care of my sheep, take care of my sheep. But a third time, Jesus asks him, and I think this is significant, right? And maybe this is obvious, but I think it struck me recently that Peter denies Jesus 3 times, and Jesus asks him 3 times. I think this is intentional on the part of Jesus. He says, do you love me, Simon Peter? And Peter was hurt. Right? I think this is important that John writes this down. In the third time he asks him, it says Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And then Jesus' response is simple, follow me. I think in the midst of pain, in the midst of shame and brokenness, Jesus meets Peter right there where he's at and lifts up his chin a little bit and goes, hey, I want you to I want to remind you of who I am, and that even where you're at right now, even like, I have to imagine in this moment, Peter had a hard time looking Jesus in the eyes. Like, very boldly on the last night, Jesus, I'd go to the grave with you. I would die for you. Denies him 3 times. And then the next time he sees Jesus, this was kind of an awkward encounter, right? He didn't believe Jesus enough to actually back up what he said. And yet Jesus looks him in the eyes, lifts up his chin and says, hey, follow me. I love you. I forgive you. And for me, man, seeing the response of Peter from here on out, you turn the page on the Gospels into the book of Acts, and Peter's going to be the one in Acts chapter 2 that preaches one of the first bold gospel messages to a crowd of people, and they're going to get baptized and receive the Holy Spirit. And I don't think that happens without this intimate moment. And man, maybe you need to hear this today. Maybe you need to be reminded of it. I know there's so many moments in my day that I need to be reminded of this. If the God of the universe, if Jesus himself lifts up my chin, looks in my eyes and says, do you love me? Remember that I love you. Okay, now follow me. Man, where else do I need to look for love? Where else do I need to look for satisfaction? Where else do I need to look for approval? Where else why would I try to find that in the things around me if Jesus himself is going, hey, you remember me? You remember that I love you? Okay, follow me. Man, what a mission statement. What a vision for my life to go let that be enough that he takes my shame and brokenness, lifts up my chin, looks me in the eyes and goes, follow me. Man, would that be just a encouragement for us today? Would that be wind in our sails to go, that's enough? And from that point of being fully known in the midst of my shame and still loved, now I can live on mission for him. Let's follow Jesus that way. Thanks, Dosers. We'll see you tomorrow.